Welcome back to the next episode of the Chris Rod Mac Show, where every week we talk about the latest development of AI and what's going on in the industry, speaking to practitioners as well as all the experts in the field. So this week we're back with some exciting news. Welcome back, Chris and Rod, before I jump straight in.
Hi everyone, really here.
Hey, thoughts?
Great. So this week we have some, I guess, very exciting news going on across AI. I think there's a given every single week. And then now with Trump's 100 days, there are also a lot of interesting stuff coming off from both the administration as well as the technology side of things. So today we're going to cover about 5 different topics. The first one is around data centers, as well as, I guess, the competition in the data center space among all the different big techs. And then we also want to cover a little bit about OpenAI, given the image generation, the Ghibli, as well as the action figures that's going on. They're now opening up to their image generator to developers, but at the same time they're also adding shopping on the B2C side of things. So I'd love to hear, talk a little bit about that. And then next we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into the usage of AI in the medical industry, both all the way from exam to diagnostic. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about tariff on robots. And lastly, whether or not one would give their, I would say, means of payments to an AI agent going forward. And without further ado, let's dive straight in. So, and the latest news that I've seen is basically, around about a week or so ago, Amazon came out and, or should I say, Wells Fargo analyst came out and said that, Amazon has halted some data center leasing talks. As we all know, or should I say, in the previous generation, in the Web 2.0, AWS has been the player for a lot of these smaller startups to build technology solutions. And then on the AI phase, obviously you have Microsoft building a lot in this space, right? I think someone told me, I believe if you just take Microsoft alone, they are going to be like the top 1 or top 2 construction company because of the amount of data centers they're building out in the US. And for those who follow, today is 1st of May, Labor Day. Yesterday, Microsoft came out and beat the estimate on the earnings, specifically driven by the AI drive. So I think for me, I'd love to understand from Chris and Rod, both your views, specifically on data centers, right? Are we seeing a shifting of competitive landscape? Because some parts of it saying that it's slowed down, some parts of it is, the beating estimates, and I assume they're probably going to build more. And not to mention, like you have people like Oracle, investing around 6 point something billion or something like that in Malaysia, in the US as well. So love to hear both your thoughts around the overall competitive landscape. How are you guys seeing this?
So I can say the following. The way I see it is that if you think you were saying, Max, about so here Web 2.0, and so back then you said, hey, I have 2 options. Either I build my own infrastructure, my own data center, and then I do everything on myself. So completely from scratch. And that's cumbersome, and that's also very low margin, and likely I don't need it because the value is really on the application and not in infrastructure. So you had a situation where all large organizations, they went from managing their own data centers, managing their own infrastructure towards the cloud. And then it became also a situation where we had a monopolist, in this case, pretty much AWS. Sure, there were others, but significantly smaller compared to the AWS. Now in this world of Gen AI, for those who are model providers, really it is renting this compute time, the business model. So if for an OpenAI, for a Mistral, or whomever else, really the business model is to say, hey, you will be paying for usage of my deploy models, then this means that they need to maximize all their costs. And it doesn't make sense for them that go and then just pretty much rent AWS infrastructure, put their application there, and then rent it again to you. Then they're leaving a significant margin there. So if you look at, for example, Mistral, there was an announcement a few months ago that they're working on their own data centers in France. If you see, for example, the same thing with OpenAI, they're looking at how they can become more independent from Microsoft Azure. And this means that you have more competitors in the market. There are more people who are offering these GPUs. And therefore, the question is for Amazon, is there really a demand for all these GPUs, considering that there's not only the classic hyperscalers, such as Azure or, for example, here AWS or Google, but also others who also have similar capacities, such as Mistral and OpenAI, and so on and so forth.
Cool. How about you, Chris? What are your thoughts around this? I think with Rod, I totally agree on the margin side of things. But I'm also thinking, to compete or to train your own models, you somehow have to be quite competitive. When it comes to like all this infrastructure, you could maybe just burn like mad at the start so that you could build out some sort of competitive mode for your models. But over time, you definitely want it to get more operationally efficient, right? So that you could get more margin out of whatever you're trying to offer.
Yeah, I think what we are seeing right now is a bit of a, let's say, divergent strategy whereby we see one class of companies sort of like pausing or maybe trying to evaluate how to like better play this game, whilst others are still investing into data centers. And I mean, just pulling up some data here, right? In 2021, according to one source, there were 209 data center deals with a value of about 50 billion. And that was about 40% increase from 2020. And it's been growing quite fast. And obviously, lots has been driven by AI and Gen AI and the demand for more compute. I think there has been a little bit of a stumble, I would say, when DeepSeek came out with a much leaner model and using less compute. And I think that's also something that perhaps we're seeing right now, where there are companies trying to think about better heuristics, better shortcuts, let's say, to consume less of compute, but get the same total productivity. And I would also think that there are research projects around the world that are looking into shortcutting something, because obviously for the last couple of or let's say last year when we actually spoke about data centers and also energy consumption, basically the game was, okay, in order to like succeed, you need to scale. And so let's just scale and like just build more data centers and more. And maybe now we see a bit more of a differentiated strategy. And also in mind, and especially given the terrorist situation, the whole uncertainty around the world, I think there are also questions around investment appetite at this point in time. Max, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I've been thinking about this, right? So if you think about nationalization, we started looking at nationalization of production. And then if you think about data models, will they then nationalize those data and models in order to keep it within their own geography? I have yet to see that play out really, really, I would say, prominently. But if that does happen, you basically go back to a little bit more of a fragmented globalization, if you will, right? So someone may serve the regional goals. So for example, data centers in Malaysia is really just to serve, web and services for, Southeast Asia, for example. I don't know if that will happen, but it's possible. And also my sense is, not just tariff, as well as the regulation side of things. I mean, we saw this with the data acts that came out where certain data needs to be stored in certain places. I remember having conversations with some startup because they were collecting some form of, personal identifier information. They had to set up like a new data center or new data operations in another country, which, for a little startup, it doesn't make sense because they just don't have the costs or don't have the money to do it. So there are like little things like that. I thought that we just have to be a little bit more cognizant about, especially when you scale all this. But at least based on what has been invested so far, all the 209 data centers that you mentioned, Chris, I feel like they're still thinking of it from a global scale perspective. So you are still building it in one place and then eventually serving those models and usage out of the countries. Because I can see escalating tariff really, really quickly from just normal products that are sending across borders onto digital products, right? People start restricting what services you can access, etc. So yeah, I mean, it's yet to be seen. What I find interesting is across all the large tech, there are still investing. Almost everyone have invested in some form of data centers. The question, I guess, then become how much value are they going to see from a return perspective, and how long of a time frame are we looking at? I'm really seeing larger organizations looking into it, but now in 2 years into it, the question is where people are already asking where's the ROI? Maybe the idea is to put your timeline a little bit longer. Great. Speaking of models, and speaking of model providers, and how can we not talk about OpenAI? I mean, the B company to come up with all the Gen AI stuff in the industry. So I think everyone, if you've been following on the podcast, you probably know that we talk a little bit about the Ghibli drawings, and then we talk a little bit about the action figures. And then last week, I think there was another one that, I think Chris mentioned that someone turned like dogs into people. And the image generator with OpenAI, is obviously getting a lot better. They're trying to open that up for developers, which I thought, would be quite a cool development, right? For people to use that image generator to create, I don't know, new Studio Ghibli, if you will. And then on the other end, OpenAI is also adding shopping to their, I would say, B2C solutions. So I wanted to get, one is a little bit more B2B, and the other one is B2C. It feels like they're firing on all fronts when it comes to access. So I'd love to hear, I guess, either of your views around the strategy. Previously OpenAI was really trying to push for, I mean, at least from my understanding, with the deal with Microsoft on the B2B side, and then on the B2C side is really, giving people the view of how generative AI could help them. That's why ChatGPT was out, at least based on Sam Altman's write up. That was what it was for. So I mean, love to hear. I guess maybe start with Rod. What do you think of the recent development on the OpenAI side, the different features and how they're positioning themselves against all the different players as well?
We had in our previous discussion, in our previous episode, all these Ghibli image updates, all this trend, craze, how people could take their image and convert it, some Ghibli-like anime. And this was an example how OpenAI has been improving their models, where if you think how it was just even a couple months ago, they had very limited image generation capabilities, especially compared with Grok or others, even Mistral, etc. Their image capabilities were much inferior, and now they have pretty much leveled up. And also going back to Max's previous segment on hardware. So we must also remember that all of these providers, they are competing against Meta Llama models, which are open weight or open source. And also Meta itself is now becoming, and hyperscaler is now starting to offer, provide inference service on the cloud. And it is also possible to generate images with these Meta models. So all of a sudden, one of the reasons why we would need to use, for example, Amazon or other hyperscalers, which is running these open source models, then you might not really need to, because you can go directly to the source, which is Meta, and then use it from there. And Meta as well has, with their Llama models, their own model generation capabilities. So here is this pretty much like rat race where everyone is just trying to run on the same wheel, trying to be a bit ahead. But this lead is only, let's say, a very, very marginal, and it only lasts for a few weeks, a few months. And then the next provider comes and it has some new developments that make the others less interesting, less competitive, less well ranked in here in evaluation ranking. So here OpenAI is just playing catch up, given that they were not generating images for a long time that were comparable in quality to everyone else.
Yeah, that's interesting. And basically create a hype, train your models, and then sell it to developers to build it. Basically trying to capitalize on certain trends or create trends, capitalize on them, and try to offer that to someone else from a capability perspective. I think even on the Adobe side as well, they're also trying to pull in different models to help them to do a lot of those model image generation for their end users. So it feels like the ultimate I will call it economics stays with some of the larger companies, but then you use the B2C side to train the models in a way.
No, Max, I wanted to agree with you. I think it's basically what we see on the translation side as well, right? Like you use manual human translators to train the models, and then basically you get disrupted by the models. I think we see something similar maybe also on the creative side. I remember now 10, 15 years ago when I was deep in the weeds of Photoshop and digital art and all of that, like creating these fantasy worlds for, let's say, games. That was a job at the time, right? But you could now create like a Ghibli style or like fantasy style type of world just in seconds, just using OpenAI. And most likely there are some mistakes in it, but that's getting better and better. And I don't know. I mean, reading the article you provided, I think it's almost like a no-brainer that they came up with it. But I do worry about the creative community, because essentially it's just a pump, not any creative juice that you need to put in. probably most likely you don't even need to have Photoshop anymore. Like, yes, I know Adobe is like, putting some AI into Photoshop, but honestly speaking, you probably don't need it anymore in 3 years. I would probably bet that you don't need Photoshop anymore, given that you have all the advancement in AI.
And you make very good points, Chris. So I was reflecting now, what has changed in, let's say, just this year, where even though these image generators, they were getting more realistic, something where all of them always struggled was adding text to an image. So for example, it was very difficult to create a logo because a logo would have maybe some words. Let's say that we want a logo for, so here, Chris Rod Max. Then we could have, of course, the figure inside. But then having the name Chris Rod Max in the image, it will also be maybe some strange signs, something that is non-legible. And now, if you look at what is possible, then it's really possible to have, for example, let's say a prompt where you say, I want a Simpsons character that is next to a blackboard and is writing, I love Chris Rod Max. And it will generate that with a very legible text that looks like it's part of the image. And connected to that, if you think about how we had these image generators, for a very long time, they were only really able to generate these futuristic, Blade Runner-like images, so darker tones, robots, this, that. But they were not that good in just having what you're describing now. So this Photoshop-like type of clip art artwork, that was not really so their forte. And now both are possible, having realistic images that can be used, more like clip art, more like logotype, everything. And yeah, it definitely will have an impact on both, of course, the creative industry, and so here designers and the vendors such as here Adobe and Photoshop-like tools.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, right? Like, so on all this futuristic stuff, I used to download them via DeviantArt to put it on your as your background. And with all this AI now, I was like, okay, what's the point of DeviantArt? Maybe half of them is flooded by OpenAI generated images. So you could actually become a huge art because of your taste without actually knowing what to draw or how to draw even. I don't know, something to ponder in my head because like, oh, if I have an idea. So anyway, sorry, Chris.
Next, you're sort of revealing your age. DeviantArt, it's been a while. Do they still exist, actually?
They are the largest. They are the largest online art community. If I'm not wrong, they still are. They still are.
It's still around. But Max, considering that you are so deep in the fintech and also crypto and everything, I was thinking, doesn't that mean that pretty much NFTs are a dead topic? Because if now the idea of the NFTs was this scarcity, and then if you're an artist and so on, then you can generate these digital assets, etc. But now, so you have really good image generators, and then so things such as, for example, here DeviantArt that you're describing. Before there will be a creative person that will be doing this artwork, uploading it. Now it has this mass, and therefore this scarcity is no longer there. So if I'm thinking where will be the future of art and creativity, it'll be rather on having actual physical art of someone going and painting it by hand, and that's where it'll be. So here the work, the actual creative artistic performance, whereas everything is digital is really a commodity and there is no actual value in it.
Yeah, good question. Thinking about value, right? So value comes from, let's say, supply and demand in this case, right? So if it's created for the only thing in the world, you could either put a zero number, say it's made today with certain amount and with, with certain skills. That's what makes it a little bit valuable, right? It's a little bit like, if everyone can be Van Gogh, what's the value of Van Gogh now? So if everyone could draw a Starry Night, it's just, which one resonates the most with you. So I think the NFT point, absolutely. I think with the current construct of financial services, there's definitely some sort of value if you're able to track it uniquely, to be able to say that, like, this is the only supply in the market. And if everyone wants to get that only supply for whatever reason, you tell a story around it, then it creates some sort of narrative around it. But then if you're doing it, digitally, which we are seeing now with NFT, it kind of just collapse. I don't know if it will actually ever come back. It might actually come back, who knows. But I do think, by ascribing some sort of scarcity to it will change the value of some of this, even if it's digitally created art.
I think it's crazy because I feel like these trends have come and go so quickly. Like, I mean, there was a time where you would pay 3 to 5 million for like a stupid made NFT, and now you can basically replicate most of it through AI, and you just like generate. So what? And it's just crazy to me. I feel like, I don't know how you guys think about it, but I feel like lots of people are getting tired, like fatigued by AI and Gen AI, just simply because the development and the things that you see are so fast that people just feel overwhelmed. Like, literally, I think at our fingertips, there's so much more information now since we have ChatGPT and we can like curate our questions and get the answers immediately. How do you guys feel about it?
I say exactly. I think a lot on so what will be so the future for professions now that you're discussing here the creative so profiles, any type of like creative professions, designers, etc. Is similar for like developers and how AI is impacting all these different jobs. And my impression is that so far AI is pretty much like mass is not exactly like uniqueness, not like quality. You can notice when something is AI generated, and as a result, you assign maybe like a lower value to it because you said, oh, it was generated with a prompt, that there is no actual value from that. Similar, for example, with text. It is so rather easy after a while to start noticing, hey, this text looks like it was not really written by a human, but actually is using some AI model. And as a result, maybe it's not even worth my time because it takes me longer to read it than the time that it was taken to create it. And I see there'll be definitely a market for actual human work where they'll be valued for actual writers who are using their own creativity, their own mind, to create stories, and same so for artists, people also who have actual ideas and they're doing something unique. And another thing I was thinking about all this topic of like NFTs is I remember that many of them, it was promoted as, hey, these are actually AI generated images. So I'm not sure, but I think like all these Bored Ape Club and so on, they were originally generated so with an AI, but that was like in 2021. And then the novelty was that back then it was rather hard for anyone that used these AI models. It was limited to just a few who really knew how to use them. And there was something cool about it where you say, hey, these were AI image generated and so on. This is like special. But now we have seen this democratization happening in the last 4 years. And then an AI image generated, it means nothing, right? It has a zero monetary value and nobody will pay for something that one can also create. And so here with so any type of image generator. There was also some discussions that there might be a marketplace, for example, so for like prompts, or saying, okay, I'll buy a prompt for things. But even then, I'm not even sure because, yeah, so on one side, having prompts is rather straightforward. On the other side, even if I give you the prompt for something, there is not a guarantee that you'll get the exact same result as I'm getting. So in order to replicate it, that will be guaranteed. So I just think here, definitely humans will have to specialize in high creative work, but that is much more physical, maybe like a book writing by hand, maybe like painting by hand, and then everything is AI, the value will be very, very limited.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, right, before we move on to the next one, I think to talk about creativity, I think in the Silicon Valley community, they talk a lot about taste, right? So what is taste? How do you even develop taste? It's a question that I have in my head. And I think it's an aggregation of all the different experiences that you have had, all the different interpretation that you do on certain stimuli. And I think, over time that develops differently, and therefore some will resonate with people, some won't. It's a little bit like how you have a lot of different artists that create different music. They're probably equally good, but some will, be more popular than the others, and because it resonates in a certain way. And that taste is something, I guess, if we were to break it down, what would that be? I don't know. Maybe that will be the difference, by creating something unique or something special, if you will.
I was just checking out here these NFTs, these apes, and actually they were not AI generated. It was like step before. So they had artists generating the different traits and characteristics, and then they used just some simple scripts and algorithms to randomly choose the different parts and pieces that belong to an ape or so like this. They had also like zombies and all other type of like different collections. But yeah, so the idea was, okay, you have something unique because it was generated by an algorithm.
Yeah, it's it. I remember someone, I think my brother did something like that. So he was hand drawing all the different traits, and then he will create an algorithm to basically make them into something. So it's quite interesting. Cool. I think what I get out of this is basically, in the future, we kind of have to think about how to develop our own taste. You have to be yourself, more of yourself than anything, because that is what gives you that unique value. Your experience is not the same as someone else's. Even if you go through the same thing, just that you write a prompt into the same model, it will still spit out a different outcome. So yeah, cool. On that note, another article that I read that is super interesting this week is basically around medical in the medical field. So there was a study done by University of Buffalo, specifically on your evidence-based medicine, and there's this exam that your doctors have to take. And what they did was basically run an AI on it, and then get the doctors to sit them or just take like past exams on those doctors, and they just compare the results. Turns out, obviously, AI is extremely good at doing some of this, memorizing as well as, I would say, optimization task, really trying to answer those questions. I think one thing that come into my head are twofold. Number one, how far can we actually take this tool? If someone is better than exam, in general, you would think that they probably will be somehow better in real life when they perform the task, because they will remember some of those facts, right? And then therefore, can you actually develop a doctor all the way down? There was an article that I think came out last night or something like that, where the UK government is saying that doctors can use AI for whatever they do. There are like a few tasks that they list out. So I think we're definitely trending that space. But the question is, how far can you take it? And then the second thing is just thinking from learning perspective. Like our school systems, or majority of the world's school systems, are still based on standardized tests. And somehow standardized tests is still the way we measure someone's intelligence. So is that really a good idea? Or if not, how will you change it? Especially in the advent of Trump signing an executive order for AI to be relevant in all schools. Same thing in China, probably same across most of the country. I remember Malaysia already signed this some time ago when Sense Time was around. So I wanted to get both your thoughts on both of that question, right? So number one is, how far can we take AI in the medical field? And then before that, we can jump on to the exam question part.
Max, you're throwing so many philosophical questions into our room today. Honestly speaking, I actually believe that technology is already so good, or as good as a human, when it comes to medical experience and knowledge. There's no reason why a machine couldn't do it better, even better, because humans forget, machines don't, but maybe sometimes they hallucinate. I think for adoption, it's not about technology, it's more about the habit of people, right? And I think the best analogy to that one is this whole space around autonomous driving, right? That trend has been around for quite a bit of time. And I think, yes, now you in California, like LA and SF, you can actually get an autonomous car to drive you around the city. But it's a matter of adoption and trust at the end of the day, right? And I think the question is really who to blame when something happens. Actually, there was a case I remember in China where there were 3 ladies driving to their exam, and they had a Xiaomi car, and it was like on autopilot, so basically driving without them steering the car, and then it became they got into an accident and they all died. And obviously, one of those cases or one of those stories make you think about, okay, how do you actually evolve the legal system to govern such new technologies? And I think that's really what it comes down to. So one is trust, habit, and people's adoption of technology. And then the second one is obviously the legal framework around that. And autonomous driving is one thing. I think medical application is, I would even think, more complicated and more complex, just to change the entire system on that. So that's basically my take. So I think technology-wise, we're probably there, or give it another 6 months and technology would be there. But I think in terms of adoption, we still have to go a long way to your vision of having a complete robotic or / software-based doctor.
Cool. Yeah, I think you mentioned a very good point, which is around accountability. The legal system, ultimately, what it's trying to do is basically force some sort of accountability on everything that we do. So, put it crudely, you need someone to blame just in case shit goes south. But, are we ready for that? And even when it comes to liability, like whose accountability? Is that the user, or is it the technology creator? And if that liability or accountability falls with the creator, then the creator will have to think very deeply, which means you're going to go through, some of the big problems that pharma industry is going through, which is you go through super rigorous testing for any innovation to even get pushed out. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting point. How do you evolve our legal system to be able to govern technology as such? Rod, what's your view?
So here, thinking about what you're saying, how is it that all these standardized exams will be in the future? Also, the point on here, technology evolution and so on. I think that for highly regulated environments, it just takes a lot of time, right? That you may say, hey, these AI doctors, they're already there, they are as good as a human doctor and so on. But so no matter wherever you are, and then you go to a hospital and then you see the technologies around, I always get the impression that I'm somehow transported back to the 90s, right? So seeing the computers they have there, seeing all the equipment that is there and so on. And then you think, hey, in this environment, so there'll be now here some advanced AI models doing some sort of automation, whatnot. I'm not so sure. It takes quite a while just to have the rollout implementation. so 2 years ago, I was helping a startup in that space. So with a tool for doctors in how to become more productive. And really a hurdle for them was just getting that tool, the distribution part, getting the tool to the doctor, just because of the fact that there needs to be so many approvals, so there is such a long process behind and so on. And I'm not yet sure if to this day they've been able to just have the rollout. It takes a lot of time. And this topic of how we'll be rated in the future, how we'll be evaluated, I think here we'll be making a comeback to oral exams. I think the future will be everything presential. And so you want to be evaluated, then you'll have to come and then be in front of a whiteboard, and then an evaluator will ask you a question, and then you draw it on the whiteboard, and that's how you show if you know something or not. Because everything else, yeah, so you have some AI, and maybe this room might be so secluded with some devices to prevent having some headphone or some sort of device that you can so pass your questions to ChatGPT and then getting the answer on your ear or something like this. So it becomes something where we have to go very low tech in a bunker, and then that's where we'll be evaluated.
Yeah. It's almost like you need to, well, take the facts, but then tell it in a different way, kind of solicit some sort of emotional response almost, right? To be able to evaluate it, whether or not certain things work, whether or not certain things will get adopted. I think to both your point around the habit of consumers, one thing, so I've been going to a chiropractor just basically to check out my shoulder, and in there they basically give you an app. That app is for chiropractors to give you exercises to do at home. And I saw the number one bad feedback in there was someone was using it to change their own exercises, and then they blame the app for being bad because they're giving them bad exercises. But the app to begin with was for chiropractor to give you some sort of exercises. You're not supposed to go in to pick your own exercise and do it for yourself. That person ended up, obviously not very happy with the experience. But I find that quite interesting. It kind of ties into, the habit is not there. You can see how users would blame certain tools when it's really, the way they adopt the technology hasn't quite caught up with what the technology is meant for, to begin with. Great. I guess on that note, I would say the joy of watching what's going on with the world. There's a lot going on when it comes to politics as well. So tariff is probably the number one thing for the last 100 days when Trump come into power. We're seeing, a Financial Times recently published an article around how tariff is slowing down some of the robot development. And the other thing that I also find quite interesting, I didn't know how big Asia was on robot. Within the article actually says that a lot of the robots in the world are largely manufactured in Asia, and by slapping tariff on some of these allies from the US, it might actually slow down robots adoption to actually gain that I would say push out the ability to gain the benefits of all these robots. So I'm just curious to hear both your thoughts on this. First on the overall, I guess, robotic industry with AI, and then Rod, you mentioned doing something physical. Maybe robot can do something physical for us too. So wanted to hear both your thoughts on that.
So my thought here is, so I'm given that we're an AI podcast. So robots and robotics, let's say those that you see in a factory and so on, they are right now quite disconnected from this generative AI, ChatGPT world. And there is a complete discipline just for creating system control for these robotic arms and the robotic systems. And sure, we're trying to bring them together, but right now that's not the case. However, when I think about robots, for me, these robots are not necessarily in a factory. They're not necessarily with a human shape. They are not anthropomorphized, if that's said correctly, but rather it is self-driving cars. And that's here where I see maybe there might not be that much demand right now for robots in factories, but self-driving cars, for Uber-like replacements, the demand there is huge. And then here we've seen so much development in the last couple of years. And so perhaps it's still too early for saying, so we will be replacing all factory workers with some robots inside. However, it is likelier that your Uber driver might get replaced by a self-driving car, and that's a robot.
I mean, in order to even get to that, right? So somehow, I think in the article, it also mentioned that to build a robot, a humanoid robot, you need quite a lot of parts from let's say different parts of Asia in order to pull it together. There are a lot of companies in the US are trying to build humanoid robots. I think we're not there yet, right? From AI down to the physical build of it. And I think with the advent of all this tariff, I guess my biggest worry is that you could have all the best technology on the other side, but you have no way of building it. And then what will happen? Is the person who can build it, or is the person who knows what to build? That's more important. I don't know. It's just something that has been playing in my mind.
I think to me, these two topics are very decoupled, right? One is you're talking about tariffs, and that's a rabbit hole we could go through. And then the other one you're talking about is the fact that robots and robot research has been quite big in Asia. And indeed, it's true. And maybe let me start with the second part. There has been quite a bit of research, especially in Japan and South Korea. I remember there's this years ago, there was this robot that was able to play a violin, and that was like very sensational. I think the most recent thing that happened was in Beijing, where I think 21 humanoids robots actually participated in the half marathon, and officially it's one. So basically, they had another line or lane. So you had the humans on one side, and then the robots on the other side, and the engineers were allowed to come and help these robots once they fell or once they ran out of battery and to change the battery. And I think the fastest robot made it in about 3 hours or so. And I think this is sensational because I think we're getting one step further towards the human robot being, sort of more intelligent. But I think there's also a question like, what's the application? Are we going to see a world where, some like Netflix series, they project these beautiful Scarlett Johansson-like robots being your maid or whatnot to like take care of your kids? Is that really where we're headed to? I think that's like sort of like one conversation to have. I think on the second one around tariffs, yes, it's been quite chaotic, I would say, but overall the message is very easy, right? It's basically Trump trying to play hardball in order to then start to negotiate with each and every individual country. I think what I find very interesting though is that this hardballing doesn't really work on China. So I think that's twofold. One, I think there was a first tariff war that caught China a bit off guard back in 2015, 16. So ever since, China has been decoupling from the US. So the impact of the 145% tax isn't as big as you would probably expect, or perhaps it caught some other countries. I think the second part to this is that China doesn't touch down. So they basically right now, there are also quite a bit of tariffs on US products getting into China. And so it's a bit of a standoff, I would say, at this point in time. But we do see that quite a few categories are impacted, especially on the e-commerce side, where, you had to be minimums of $800. So basically anything from Temu or Shein or one of these big e-commerce players, they need to like think about front loading, or they even like announced, I think a week ago, to like hike prices. So I think you have a little bit of that chaos going on. I think on the, let's say industrial raw materials like steel, I think we do see some loopholes. And I think, to me, those are two different topics. Or, of course, I think what I see in the industry right now is that everyone's sort of like in a wait and see mode. And coming back to your article around robots and virtual space, I think, yes, of course, any technology, any parts that produces technology, for example, the semiconductor industry, are obviously impacted directly or indirectly by tariffs. But I wouldn't see it like as a robot-specific type of problem that we're facing right now.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. In the interest of time, I think we'll also move on to the last topic that we have for today. Is around Visa. So we talk a little bit about robots, we talk a little bit about AI, robots in the physical world, and now obviously in the AI world, everyone that's been following the forecast will probably heard about agents, which is technology, or should I say AI chatbots that do things on behalf of us, being able to help, I guess, us to do certain tasks. And then Visa, I think they just announced they're going to work with some of those larger AI companies, basically enabling the Visa payment for some of these AI agents. I guess my general sense is, I feel like the AI agents are there, but not quite there for prime time yet. So it's just quite interesting to hear both your thoughts. Would you give your card to an AI agent to do some shopping on behalf of you? Or would you, I guess, at least entrust it to do somehow, I don't know, de minimis, payment for whatever it is that you want to buy? So I don't know. I mean, I like to think we're relatively forward looking, but I don't know if I would do that yet. So, Rod.
I see this as, let's say, like the next evolution, the next step. So from buying, for example, through these comparison portals, right? So where you say, hey, I want to do some bookings, maybe I want to buy some stuff instead of going to the store. First, I compare prices. I use these aggregators, and then through the aggregator, I place the order. Here is basically the same intent. I want to use an agent just because I believe the internet is very large. There might be there might be many offerings, and somewhere there might be some place that is more affordable than buying directly from Amazon. So then I use this agent that will have as a task browsing the internet, finding the best offer, and then placing the order for me. And this will be basically the same as we were doing before. So just a little bit of less human involvement, a little bit of less human labor. And therefore, I do think that you have significant adoption. Rather, what I see here from Visa side is this needed for staying relevant, because if we think, hey, more and more this shopping will be delegated to others. And also the challenge of using a payment versus another will reduce. You'll say, hey, I use Visa because it has the highest level of acceptance across multiple merchants. But now if some scrappy startup instead offers some payment method that is maybe more cumbersome, but however, this is managed by an agent, it's no longer you who has to deal with it and so on, then why will people use Visa? Well, perhaps just because it has a stronger brand, but then the actual benefits from using Visa, they'll be more negligible. And then therefore, I think here, you just need to stay relevant and come up with some ideas how they can still be on people's mind.
In a way, is to reduce, I guess, the switching costs, or should I say increase the switching costs, because you're now already available for all the different merchants. Now you're also available from all over internet, really, because you can find anything to buy.
So I like the use case Rod was mentioning, basically the research of getting the best deal, have an agent help you, save you lots of hours of research yourself. I think the second part to it is also how much control do you give an agent? My hypothesis is that a lot of people don't trust AI agents just yet with making payments. Just imagine they would buy lots of things and you have like a credit card invoice, which it goes through the roof. Like, I don't think anyone wants to have that. But then again, I believe if Visa is looking into that research, I think it generally, I believe it's a good thing. And if there are measures you put in, like limits or whatnot, or you give a mood book to that AI agent, I think that adoption will eventually come. I think at this point in time, everyone talks about AI agents. I don't think anyone really understands what it means. Definitely people that are non-technical. And that will just take time for people to understand and then eventually to adopt.
Yeah, I think it ties back to what we were talking about earlier, which is around, I guess, the liability of it, right? So I was thinking of what Rod's use case, for example, if I were to give them my card and somehow, the AI decided that, it's time to go buy, I don't know, some basketball jersey because you like basketballs, and then spend like, 10,000 on it. And then let's say a fraud happened, like, where does it lie? How will that work? Is that the agent's fault, or is that my fault, or is that the seller's fault? Like, how would one get compensated? And even if you want to bring it to the court to get accountability, like what are you going to sue and who? So I think I think in general, I feel like the ability to get AI agents to do things for us autonomously on certain higher degree stuff, absolutely great. But then there will be outliers that we need to think about. And financial services, one way or another, has always been, building for that 1% instead of 99%. That's why you have tons and tons of compliance problems, right? Or should I say compliance tasks, so that people would follow the rules. Great. I guess, given that it's 1st of May, it's holiday in some parts of the world, and it's Labor Day. Hopefully Robot doesn't come over and take over yet. We talk a little bit about different things today. So first off, we talk a little bit about, big tech and their, investment in data centers. We then talk a little bit about OpenAI and their recent, I guess, development on the image generator. We spent a little bit of time to talk about, adoption of AI in the medical field. And then we spent a little bit of time talking about how tariffs is impacting, I guess, different industry, and then also robots. And lastly, talking a little bit about, what Visa is doing with the AI ecosystem. And as usual, thank you so much for joining us this week. We enjoy producing this, just to learn about what's going on in the market. I hope you too. And for those, who like it, please like, subscribe, or share it with anyone you like that you think would find this interesting. And stay tuned for the next episode of the Chris Rodmack Show.